Right. Okay. Yeah, my idea really today was just to talk a little bit about the research area that I'm interested in, which, as you can see, is student transitions into HE. But also just to go through some of the research lessons that I've learned along the way, and also the experiences that we've had as a department in trying to make sure that students transition into HE more effectively. Some of them are anecdotal, which I think is just as valuable actually as the research element, but you'll see a little bit more of that. And as I've spoken to the two colleagues at the back, some of this is a little bit for selfish reasons because I need to just get this out into the open about what the hell I'm doing my PhD on, or my doctorate on. So yeah, I'm using you a little bit. Okay, so just first up for a little bit of context, just where I'm coming from in terms of this research really. Previously, I worked for Newcastle and Stafford Colleges Group and had a lot to do with the BTEC and the higher education courses related to that college. And now at Staffordshire University, I also have oversight for the partnerships that we've got in sport and exercise. So a lot of my remit really is trying to attract, recruit and retain those students who sometimes might not otherwise be captured as well. I'll talk a little bit more about the tendency to recruit from those from vocational education training later, but that will show really where I'm coming from. My background's in sport and PE, but I will try and make it as relevant as I possibly can to colleagues. I'm an Ofsted inspector as well, which isn't all doom and gloom. It's quite a nice thing to be involved in, but it does give me a significant flavour of what further education is like behind the scenes as well, which is really interesting. I'm an FD candidate, very interested in transition, but particularly the bottom bit about non-traditional or so-called non-traditional students. And I think a lot of it, just by the nature of where we are in Stoke-on-Trent, with social mobility issues, it tends to be that we recruit a lot of our students from those sorts of demographics. So that's what I'm particularly interested in, and then solutions at the end as well. Okay, so just some key things that I'm going to go through. Applying transition to our context, but specifically related to what we're doing in the sport and exercise department, or what we've tried to do. Exploring issues related to transition and define it a little bit more acceptably, and then think about what solutions there might be. I'm going to get you guys to do a little bit of interactive work, no real pressure, but a tiny little bit anyway, just to keep you engaged. Okay, right. So firstly, I want you to try and define transitions into HE for me. So it can be done in pairs or individually, and I'm just going to give you a minute to kind of put you on the spot. What do you think transition means, or it is? Just 60 seconds. I've given you some prompts there. So is it a process? Is it something that students might have or haven't got, or they can be helped or hindered? Is it something that can be learned or taught? The last bit I'm particularly interested in, do you think it's a fixed point in time where something actually happens and then they move into the next stage? How would you define transition? That's a big question. I'll give you 60 seconds, have a little think or chat, and I'll ask you some questions. Sorry to put you on the spot. Actually, I'm not sorry, because I know you've got questions for me.
The thing is, I did my master's on a little bit of transition, but the role of the personal tutor.
Okay.
So the transition from into HE, so transition.
You'll be an expert in this then. Great, I'll come straight to you in a minute. You want to go for it? You got that?
Is it not for you?
We were thinking, is it right
a transition?
Sorry.
That's okay.
For how I understand transition would be adaptation to something new.
Okay. Yeah, on the part of the student, they're adapting to something new.
Do you think new environment? I think we have used to education, a new form of learning. Transition, I would certainly say that stepping up to HE would be something transition, adaptation to something new ways of learning, and even reflecting.
Okay.
For me, from what I've done previously, it's a process.
Okay.
And it really is. It is not a clear, defined step up. It's a continuum, if you like, and it goes on for quite a period of time. A lot of the research looks at like the first 6 weeks of the students being in the HE environment, but the transition goes on a lot further than that, possibly to the end of the first semester. And at that point, maybe we could say that they're transitioning. But then there's research as well now that says that they transition to each step, so level 5, level 6.
I might switch positions with you in a second.
We use that terminology, that transition from level 4 to level 5. So we actually use the transition, that terminology. And to me, it's that period of time, genuinely that period of time. And I don't think there is an end start. There's a start point, but there's not an end point. Because I think every student, as we know, is an individual. So, do we get them through the transition into that first level? Then go, oh, we're going to transition again now, we're going to transition again. And does it take them, it would be interesting to know if it takes them the same period of time to transition to each different level, or do they use the skills they've learnt at level 4 to help them transition quicker into level 5 and then quicker into level 6, or not, as the case may be.
Great. Angela?
Yeah, we both thought it was a continuous thing, but just something, I was just looking at it and I was just thinking, well, hang on, that first transition, now that's going to be a lot different for different students, because if someone has come 100 miles and is living in a new town, that's just boom,
Absolutely.
I remember reading this theory of that Van Gary, rites of passage, where all the bonds are broken and with your family and friends, and you make new ones. That's massive, isn't it, that one? But if you're a commuting student, probably not so massive. But then, so they could be really big when they start, but then I agree with everyone else. It's ongoing, they're evolving. So
that's great. Well, you're all already ahead of the game here, because most people sort of see it as or more traditional definitions. I always get that fixed point in time. All of a sudden, you jump into the next stage, and actually, doesn't quite work as methodically as that. So it's nothing really related to the next point or a fixed turning point. Actually, it's more appropriate to think about those as quite unhelpful definitions, because they remain quite static. They're unappreciative of the nuance, Angela, that you were talking about people moving away, where they've come from. And then most importantly, they're unappreciative of their individuality. So a lot of the things that I'm looking at in particular are about foregrounding students' lived experiences. What have they gone through before? Where have they accrued social, economic capital, whatever cultural capital, and then how does that help them to deal with transitioning into HE? So really, my idea is to use this sort of transitional definition, a bit of a merged one, the capacity on the part of the student to navigate that change over time, but that change can start very, very early, before they even get to university, and then continue on after that, and then appreciative of the student's life cycle, like I said. And obviously that's important for us, and me in particular in the sport department, because it means we can scrutinise transition in relation to agency and structure in particular. And by that I mean, are there structures in the university and the college which actually impede or prevent or propose, barriers for some students, and impede that individual's capacity to navigate the change? And on the flip side, does it take into account, or it does take into account, students' individual agency, who they are, what they engaged with, where they've come from, have they had to move, do they commute, what happens to them? So those two things together really, really help, and they've helped conceptualise transition for me and for us in the sport department as well. So therefore, our focus is really thinking about, in the sport department, how to provide the tools that students need to move into HE, pick up quite early what they haven't got or what they haven't had previously, and try and implement that very quickly. So that's why a lot of my research is going to be looking at the first semester. So in week 2, they'll be receiving an interview, and then in week 14, an interview as well, to try and document how they've managed to transition immediately and what actually has been put in place to help them out. So the two fundamental things that we need to consider, or the questions we need to be asked: what are the changes or the issues that students typically encounter? And then how can we, in the sport department or as a university more widely, aid that navigation? So because of that, I'm going to get you to do one last thing. I promise there won't be too much after this. I want you to come up with as many different barriers just inside of a minute as you possibly can for students who want to move into higher education. Number 1 might be travel. Okay, go for it. I'm going to ask you to fire 5 or 6 at me in a minute. Okay.
Academic skill.
We don't see it as a barrier, but they might see it as a barrier. potential.
Issues that they may face, but they have moved, or even if it's just coming in.
Fear of change.
Go on then, I'll ask you to fire a few at me then. So the key issues and barriers that spring to mind, go for it, shout them out.
Financial,
Yeah, finances, great. Keep them coming.
family commitments.
Family commitments, yeah. Care commitments, great.
Planning and, planning their own time.
Yeah, absolutely. That independence or move, it's almost detach the umbilical cord from structured college and school life, good. Social, yeah, fantastic, yeah, really important.
Fear of change.
Fear of change, absolutely, we all fear that. Anything else?
It's academic skills as well.
Great, okay.
Age,
There's,
I said age.
no, absolutely.
Well, it's not a barrier for us, it's a barrier for them. 'Cause
Yeah, yeah.
The age isn't a barrier, obviously, as long as they're over 18. The other end of the scale, within reason, is not really an issue. So, but they might see it as a barrier. The amount of times we have conversations with students saying, "I'm 55," which is very young. How old I am. I'm too old to be a nurse. Actually, you're not. The NMC say you can keep. There is no at the moment. There is an endpoint, but it's not 55. I'm going to be in a classroom full of 18-year-olds. No, you're not. Actually, 18-year-old almost. That's the unusual one now, from our perspective, than it is from the mature student.
And the apprehension that they have at the age of 55 is a very different type of apprehension to the ones at 18, isn't it? It's completely different the way they see things. The 18-year-old's going, right, am I mature enough, can handle all the different things that are going on? 55-year-old as well, I know how to do all that. It's more actually, am I cut out for education? Have I forgotten everything?
Technology is a barrier also.
Yeah, absolutely. 100% it is. So there's a number of different things. I'm not going to get you to do this next thing because it's a slightly different element, but we're going to go through what I'd like to go through, are 4 of the key elements that we've looked at in the sport and exercise department and decided that these are particular barriers based on our experiences and what the research tells us, and then try and arrive at a few solutions. So by all means, if you've got any questions or comments, I'd invite colleagues to say whatever about the next few things, because this is all based on the work that we've done over the last year, and a lot of it is going into my thesis, so hopefully it's all right, and if it's not, you need to tell me. Okay, right. So the first one in particular is the difference in academic level. So we tend to find that students are apprehensive about that step up or step into HE. So there's a different expectation in particular for assessments for those from vocational education and training, and that seems to be felt more acutely among those students. So the typical A-level students, I'm talking from those who are 18 and 19 stepping straight into HE, they tend to find it a little bit easier and understand the expectations. They've been introduced to things like referencing and writing style. They're used to doing the reading around the subject, or some of them tend to be anyway. But the vocational education and training ones who come from the BTECs, who have been taught and assessed in different ways, don't necessarily marry with what the expectations are on our course. The heightened academic content, which is consistently applied. Obviously, they have a taster of that at BTEC, maybe in doing a research project, and that it's applied there. But here, it's applied rigidly, and by the end of the first year, they better have got it. And the lack of preparedness. So preparedness is quite a broad word, but in terms of the academic level, those authors talk about how potentially that vocational education training doesn't necessarily marry with preparing them for group presentations, individual presentations, and academic writing style. So some of the solutions that we've worked on as a department, or that we think are working very, very well, the first one is effective pre-intervention. So before they even get here, we found that some students, because even if it's just an informal meeting with us or they've had a taster session, that's absolutely crucial. They access that guidance, they put a face to a name, they realise we're not big, bad, scary lecturers, and that we're not all doctors, professors, and we are amenable. They can talk to us, and that helps them to settle immediately. Partner working at the university and the college, obviously a big part of my remit is to work between local colleges and the university to try and make sure that step up is engineered and embedded quite quickly early on in their transition. So we found that those two things, and I know these things sound quite obvious, but I guess there's a way in which we've done them over the last year that have meant, or over the last couple of years, that have meant students have transitioned very, very well. The other thing is obviously taster sessions consistency. And what I mean by implementing them consistently is we've had, over the last year, we've had Codsall Football Academy, just as an example, and we've had the Andy Griffin Football Academy from Newcastle. They've come up 3 or 4 times throughout this academic year. I know from each of those cohorts there might be 5 or 6 coming onto our football degree or PE degree or whatever it might be. They know our names, they've got our emails. It might be an informal question about the course that they've got. That's it, we're their choice now. They don't see anywhere else that they want to go. They're happy to come here. So before they even get here, before they've even landed, they feel happy and a lot more. And one of the big ones I've found with students is be very open about the curriculum and what's expected. Sometimes I think there's, I'm not saying give them all the answers or the guidance has to be too broad for these students, but sometimes I think, and I've seen other colleagues across the department give them an assignment brief and it is incredibly brief and there's very little that they actually give them by means of guidance. And I don't think there's anything wrong with giving them just a bit of guidance, especially at level 4. Let's help them embed a little bit. Of course, by the time they get to level 5 and 6 and they've got that dissertation to do, okay, well, there's an expectation for independence. There's nothing wrong with actually being quite open and involving them in the curriculum. That tends to be a really good way of doing it. Okay, any comments on that? All right, great. Happy with that. The next bit is about, and this is probably my most important bit, the thing that I think is just critical for students. Teacher-student rapport and relationships. I know firsthand that students have picked us or picked the college that I previously worked at because of the relationship that they drummed up with the lecturers. I'm not saying that that needs to be completely informal, but there needs to be that element of discussing that you actually care about what they do or know what football team they support. It might be different for colleagues in different areas, but just being able to talk to them on a level means a hell of a lot. And I think a lot of the time, some of the research that myself and Ash in our department have done, there's a perception that staff are quite standoffish and that they're inaccessible. And it doesn't have to be like that. I'm not saying you have to answer the phone at all hours, but having Teams on and replying to a message reasonably quickly or just informally asking them how their weekend was. It sounds simple, but it means a hell of a lot, especially to the types of students that we tend to get. Okay, so some of the solutions from literature and what our experiences. Really step up. Obviously, we've got visiting speakers and breaking down that barrier, that informal dialogue that I just think is pivotal to everything that we do. But during the transition, we try and embed peer groups. I think that's pretty much as we possibly, pretty much one of the most important things that we can do within the first couple of weeks, even if it's, and I know other departments will do this, but very quickly giving them something exciting or interesting to do as a group, bit of team bonding, it goes a long way. You might still lose 1 or 2 students, but that could have been 5 or 6. And just by having those peer groups and those friends and tutoring inside the first 6 weeks effectively, it just means that they know they're cared about and they know who they can turn to. I've had a couple of students this year who've thought about dropping out, but they've been retained because they've got friends in the group and they know they can approach myself and other lecturers. So that's quite nice and provides a net for them to be caught in. Any questions on that?
Wondering about distinguishing the strugglers. I mean, is it just like a general thing the tutor feels, or the student might have a problem or retention, or have you got criteria for?
No, not really. It could be someone. I mean, I've a couple of examples of this. It might be someone who hasn't submitted their assessment on time for the first assessment, or it could be somebody who's done brilliantly, got 70 and 80% all the way through the first year, and then all of a sudden they failed an exam. I've got one student like that. Just so happens he's been doing a lot of travelling because he's an international football coach, and it just took a couple of questions, and for him to say that, how can we support you in that? Then is the things that we can put online, that sort of stuff, and all of a sudden that it's about understanding where they're at in terms of their own life, social life, I suppose, and where the academic barriers might be as well.
Yeah. On with this, like in your department, because I don't know if they've rectified it, but some people are personal tutors too. It was about 200 students once. I mean, I think they've tried to rebalance it, but
it's incredibly difficult.
do that.
Yeah, so it's new to me actually, the way that we run it here. So in my old position at the college, I was personal tutor to all the degree groups. That's not to say there was loads, but there was, say, 50 students, which was manageable just. Whereas here, they do things slightly differently. So if you're got a dissertation student, you're their tutor for the third year. The course leader for the first year tends to be tutor, so you have roughly 25, 30 students. But then as they get into the second year, you kind of lose touch. I've found with some of my students where I'm not supposed to be their tutor, I found myself doing the extra bit actually and creating a group chat message in Teams to check on people and stuff like that. So it's quite complicated. And I think one thing that the university has to be maybe a little bit careful of is coming up with a something that fits for each department, which is, I know, difficult. I know it's very, very difficult. It's about finding a balance between what academics are happy to undertake in terms of personal tutoring and what they can actually manage. To be honest, Angela, I haven't really got an answer. But it means that we're going to have to think quite cleverly about it. I don't think the way we do things in sport like that particularly works. I think it should be course leader and then maybe a level mentor, but it's quite tricky.
Your course leader, are they a module leader for like one or two of the first year modules or something like that?
Yeah, they tend to be. So the course leader for football, which is me, I lead on the academic and employability skills, which is just a core module right in the first year, and the development research skills. That tends to be the case for the PE course leader, and the sport coaching one, the sport therapy one. We tend to lead on those core modules right at the start. The second year worries me the most because I tend to find that students, when they in the second year, I don't know how you guys feel about this, but when they're so far from or not so far from them, but they can't see the end point for the third year. They're just starting the second year, so that presents a real attritional barrier. Oh, I'm not sure whether I can make it to the end. So that's
my program that I run for the nursing associates is 2-year program,
right.
But we sort of hit that little bit of a barrier as well. But what we do is on their first week of year 2, we do some sessions about reflection and to actually show them how far they've come in that first year, and that seems to propel them through that initial stage. Actually go on with the rest of year 2 and level 5.
There absolutely needs to be something like that. We do have a placement module in the second year, which we've kind of slated for next year. For myself and another colleague who are going to be running the module to have the first 2 weeks as that sort of reflective piece. Right, what's my ambitions for this particular year? What can I get out of the placement, and how's it going to position me well for third year? And that hopefully should give them the impetus to think, right, I know what I'm here for now. Remind them almost.
We do it in welcome week as well.
Yeah.
What we do is we get did some like postcards. What are your ambitions for this year? Where do you see yourself next year? And then we gather them all back in and keep them, and then we give them all back out on that first day of year 2, and then repeat it. And that seems to be really effective for them.
I like to hear these tips. That's good. Lots of different things that we can take on board.
Because they do genuinely look back and say, "Oh yeah, I remember writing that." How far I've come, they can actually see the difference. And also saying to them, do not delete your first assignment.
Yeah.
Because a lot of them will delete their first one when they look back a bit later and go, did I really write that? I was rubbish.
Just on that point, actually, the first module that I mentioned, the academic and employability skills module, they have, and I think this is a really good idea, and the way they've run the module previously, I think is really, really good. So they have a 500-word essay on a subject of their choice, which is hard enough actually. So they give that 500 words in after 1 week, which I know is daunting, but it's very much just put in what you can. Tell us what you know about it. Have a go at referencing if you know what to do. Then you pick up on that, and it almost works like a draft. Then they do 1,000 words on the same or a different subject, and then they submit a 1,500-word one about 2 or 3 months later at the start of December or end of December, and they are encouraged to end their 1,000 words, their 500 words, so they can see progress. And at that point, I might reveal to them, right, that 500 words, what would you score yourself? And they go, well, 15%, 20%, and they've got 70% now, and they can see the progress, so they know exactly what they've embedded. Then I think that's a really good module. Just helps to crystallize in their head what they're looking at. Okay, 2 more things to go then. So the one thing that we found was a real barrier or a significant difference between where they'd come from and what they're going into is the standards and approaches. particularly related to independence. Students are expected to be independent and are often daunted by that. Some relish it, some really do, but some are very, very daunted. And I think we have to be careful just to loosen the reins more gradually as they go through. I've got to be careful what I say here, but some colleagues, I understand this, are perhaps a little bit more traditional in their views, in that you're in HE now, you've got to act independently, and that's absolutely fine. Just got to let go of them gently, I think, is really important.
Give them the tools. To
Yeah, absolutely. Do that first, and then they will. You know, I'm sure they will.
Tell us. They don't know what it means to be an independent.
That's it. Yeah, that's it. And it just takes it takes a bit of time. And if you're patient for 3 or 4 months, the rest of 2.5 years after that become a lot easier for them.
Exactly. Exactly.
It does. So what we found is that from experience and from literature, staff have got to be amenable, approachable, and open door where possible and appropriate. And we know that we've got a challenging work life, and finding that balance is very, very difficult. So what I'm not saying is staff should be at the students' beck and call forever and for all time. That's not the case. But there has to be a balance struck where just show them 2 or 3 times that you're prepared to go above and beyond, and all of a sudden their respect for you goes through the roof, and they're quite happy to say, I even teach them at the start how to send an email properly or appropriately, because some of them don't know. Hi Jack, how are you? Please find attached a copy of my work. Would you please have a look at it? Thanks. That's all it takes, and everything follows from that. I know that again that sounds basic, but it's the truth. I know I'm rushed for time, Angela. We'll go through. Okay, all right, I will do that. Again, acceptance by staff. Again, I said that independence doesn't have to be at the forefront all of the time. You can hold that hand a little bit. Avoiding struggles around independent learning and living. So those people Angela mentioned who are travelling in or who have moved away from home significantly. I've got a Sri Lankan student, a St. Lucian student, a Portuguese student who are living in Stoke-on-Trent for the first time. It's completely different to where they're from, put it that way, especially St. Lucia. And that particular student is living on his own. He's thrived in it, he loves it, but still got to be careful about and understand where they've come from, and just say after 2 weeks, hey, settling in, what's going on? Just basic conversation. And the best thing I think that's crucial, seminar time. I know we have a lot of lecture theatres, or rather big classes. Any time that they get to be involved in seminar time is vital, because it's just what they used to previously. I know in nursing it might be in particular quite different, that you're getting students retrain a little bit older, but for us, for 18 and 19-year-olds that come out of college from 20, they want to be involved in that same group of 20 or a group of 10 and have access to you. They're quite demanding like that. But if you do that early on, again, it really pays off with comfort. Okay. Final point is about belongingness. Really, really vital, and something that I think the sport department do actually very, very well. So students, bigger campuses, greater student numbers, it kind of means that belongingness and how they see the university is lost a little bit. We have students who come from colleges who are a smaller department, and naturally they get attached to that department over 2 years at college and they really enjoy it. They step into these big buildings that's scattered across a couple of campuses, and it's quite difficult to create that community cohesion. It means that peer groups become a little bit more fractious or less conducive to generating that belongingness. So that first 2 weeks is so vital. And the perceived accessibility of campus staff, resources, friends, all mean that it's quite difficult to generate belonging. So some of the solutions, I think a particular niche in our local area, because we capture so many from Stoke-on-Trent or Staffordshire, Cheshire, it means that we can create that belongingness quite quickly, because some of them come from the same colleges, sure, but they know the same areas, they have the same bands with each other, and those that don't, they're really interested in them anyway. So we've got an advantage, I think, in trying to merge that local percentage with those who've come from further afield. I think that's something that is, in particular for us, really, really niche.
Do you think you can start that before they even start? Not something nursing wise, as good as we should be. So that ability to, students will say, oh, have you got a WhatsApp group? Have you got a Facebook group?
Yeah.
And actually, they create their own little groups. Then, of course, then the risk is there. They've got these little cliques, because you know what you like. They are cliques, and then they give each other feedback, which is wrong. And then they're all having a crisis, and somebody sends an email and whatever else. But I think there is something that, and I'm not saying it's not something we don't do at all. I'm just thinking for us, we certainly don't do it as well as I think we could do. That pre-start, we do offer holder days, and they're very hit and miss. You're quite resource intensive, and you might only get 5 or 6 people. And actually what you really want is about 20 people in them, so that the students get to know each other and they spend the day together. Again, but they are resource intensive. But I think that we miss it, and I think if you get it right, what are you doing? Not.
There's a couple of things. I think one, technology has helped us a hell of a lot. So Sri Lankan student and St. Lucian student, they were encouraged to join us online, and we ended up having 9 out of the 12 students or 13 students that enrolled on the first year of the football degree. I remember them doing a taster meeting online, and we had a chat about their concerns, encouraged questions in the group chat and stuff like that. But they also encouraged to do, we've got our own Step Up to HE channel, sport and exercise channel, where they do a couple of pre-activities. They engage with each other on forums. So that seems to help. So when they turn up, they go, oh, your Will or your whoever. That seems to help. But the first couple of weeks in particular is just pivotal. That's the time where we get to capture it. I know I keep coming back to it, but it's just so important. And having all the lecturers on that particular day introduce who they are, what they do. They get to spend half a day with me, and we do some team bonding activities. I introduce them to the curriculum, into each other. It just helps no end. It's just vital. After that, things flow a lot more. A lot of our students are happy to engage with each other once they've broken down that first week. They've got stuck in. So that's really useful. I don't think there's a real solid answer, is there?
I don't think there is. But you know, if somebody else does it better,
yeah,
what can we learn from each other?
Absolutely.
Because that sense of belongingness, for anybody, staff included, is so important that if you don't feel like you belong, there's already a barrier up there before you've even hit that risk of that transition or anything else. If you don't feel like you belong to Staffordshire University, you don't feel like you belong to a cohort, how do you break that barrier?
We send out, and sounds quite crude actually, but we send out their kit information, so they buy their Staffordshire University tracksuit before they get here as well. That helps as well. They turn up in their colours and see other people in the same colours. We go. I know it's just sounds really basic, but it's right, isn't it?
Yeah, our students have a hoodie.
Yeah.
And it's so important, honest to goodness. We know
They love it, yeah.
Something we've always done.
Yeah.
And it's always in welcome even, am I going to get a hoodie?
Nice, isn't it?
Get a hoodie. When am I going to get my badge? And you forget the little things, and it's that it makes them feel like, and that's a bit like your sweatshirt, your trackie, in the sense of that they put that on and they wear it with pride. And it does matter.
I do things as basic like attendance leaderboards. I do assessment. Sometimes, depends which group, assessment leaderboards sometimes are really useful. Or I'll track every single grade from every assessment in every module. They love seeing that because they can see their progress or where they're dropping off or what they're predicted to get at the end of the year. Just my own individual chart. So all these little things help to build that belongingness, even if it's individually or as a group. Again, students from different departments tend to be different. Naturally, the sport department, they're quite happy to be involved in competition and go, take the mick out of each other and drive each other on forward. Sometimes that can work negatively, so I've got to be quite careful with some groups. But generally speaking, lots of different things like that help. It's just important. Sorry.
I would just like to add to that, the university is already investing in trying out something called Campus Connect, which helps the students with pre-university experience and help them overcome the fear of unknown. What it does is that the student shows interest for a prospective student, they apply, they join a community of staff members, student ambassadors, or any prospective students. That is a forum where they get the feeling of belongingness. They get to know each other, they evaluate courses. Student ambassadors let them have information on university life, campus life, finances, how to travel to university, how the cafeterias of food, accommodation, everything. Why is that? I think I'm also new here, but I think I'm just because I know about that project, it's already ongoing. We're trialing that moment at the moment. So I think to address that, Campus Connect to some extent could serve that aspect for transition.
As soon as our students arrive as well, they're all placed into their sport and exercise students team. They get all job notifications in there, any sports days or whatever it might be, coaching opportunities. We set up an individual group chat for each course. So I've got a year one football performance course, year two football performance course, and they ask questions about whatever they need to know in there, or sometimes try and give me a little bit of stick, which I try and limit as much as possible. But little things like that, they all seem to help a lot. Sorry?
How big is your cohort?
So the two, because the football degrees at the moment is an accelerated degree, there are 13 on each group. Next year, because we're changing the degree slightly, it's looking like about 25, so that'll be nice. And then PE typically 25 to 30, therapy 25, sport and exercise science 15, coaching 15. So that tends to be the group sizes at the moment.
From a nursing perspective, you're looking at 250 nursing started, 100 mental health, 50 odd child, plus nursing associate, plus our NDA. So
incredibly difficult to try and generate.
very difficult to get that same connection because it's such a big, you know, there's such big cohorts.
Incredibly big, yeah. And this is the challenge, isn't it? Especially when the university understandably wants to drive higher numbers. Well, that has a knock-on effect for retention and attrition for students and all the rest of it, doesn't it? So I don't know whether there's something that can be done in nursing where they're broken down into little subgroups for 20. I don't know whether that's an option, or
They have, they, wrong, they have, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Academic mentor groups.
Yeah.
But quite often they're more than 20.
Yeah.
The sheer practicalities of with those numbers, and they're doing 3 years, then until when one group drops off, there's no break with academic mentors. They go straight to the next group. Does that make sense? And there might be 30, sometimes a little bit more than that, and that's manageable, obviously. But when it comes to the actual whole cohort size, there's such big numbers.
Probably a little bit unrelated, I suppose, but something that we found really helps with belongingness is I use a spiral curriculum where students from year groups above are encouraged and will use students from the year below to engage with their assessments, whether it's coaching them or whatever.
Peer mentoring.
Yeah, absolutely. So that happens a lot.
Mums and daddies.
Yeah, we're pushing that more. To be honest,
that seems to work a lot. I found actually this morning that our first year football degree students, they were merged with our second ones today. Second years were doing their assessments. So right, first one, you're coming down. So attendance is compulsory. Probably shouldn't have done that anyway. But they learned a lot, even if it's just, well, the second year, I know I'm better than that already. Like they've said that just, quietly to me and stuff like that. That helps because it shows what the standard is or what they're already at and what they can get to. So just engaging with year groups above seems to have worked a hell of a lot in the past for me. Okay. And then the last couple of things, really basic ones, setting ground rules with my students. They tend to love that, and they tell me what they want from me as well. Do you demand that I respond at 11:03 p.m. on a Friday night? No, you're not getting that. Might I reply sometimes on a weekend? Yes. Don't expect it every time. So it's nice to eke that in, say I'm prepared to go above and beyond, but sometimes I'm not available, and they know that expectation, which is nice. Okay, right. So just some basic take-home messages. Transition into HE is processual. It begins even before decision making, and it is based on their foregrounding. There's got to be an appreciation of nuance and individuality as a means of securing a more effective transition or step up or into HE. That personable experience, I know there's a bit of a drive on hyper-personalised experiences for students, which is hard to find a balance between having a life and doing your job properly and making sure that every student, every single little bit about them, which is very, very tricky. But it needs to be at least at the forefront of what we're doing, I think. And the need to break down those academic barriers and the perception of HE, particularly for vocational education and training students that were a little bit inaccessible and that they aren't deserving of being. Okay.
I think that's not considered is those that don't want that interaction. They don't want that level of support. They are already independent, or they're quite shy and quiet and self-contained, so to speak.
Absolutely. I found a student this year who had been with me all the way through her BTEC, all the way through foundation degree at the college. I got a job here in July last year, and she's completely changed. She got to the university and she was brilliant at the college, outstanding, but never always loved the support she got in. And she was just like, right, this is a bit of me. I'm happy to crack on my own. I didn't really have to speak to her at all. She'd want me every now and then, but that was it. She was brilliant. So some people do just naturally happy to thrive and go for it. Some key reading there, I'm sure that can be shared around. And go easy on me, if there are any.
I think we've done enough.
Yeah, I think you have done.
I do not think we've been unkind enough.
Worked harder than I have, to be honest.
That was really interesting. Thank you. Genuinely, really interesting.
Are there any questions? Go on, Anshul.
What are the different stages of your research that involved? You're finishing a PhD. What are the different stages specifically on this project that catered to?
So at the moment, I've done the two research papers that are in press at the moment. We're on student decision making. So why students opted to study for a foundation degree in a college rather than coming. So that's sort of set up what my thesis is going to be about, which is transition into university and into college-based higher education. So I'm going to do almost a bit of a comparison. Well, that's my idea, as long as I pass my Viva. So that's at its proposal stage at the moment. And the idea is to start data collection sharpish in October, so in week 2 of their transition. Identify the students that need to into here and into a local college as well, where they study pretty much exactly the same degree, and analyse that transition, but with an appreciation of where they come from, who they are. So getting them to complete field diaries is going to be pretty important. Okay.
What's your gut feeling about why people decide to go to college rather than uni, or uni rather than college?
Probably more based on my anecdotal experience, but chances are belongingness and the relationship that they've got with lecturers for 2 years. I don't think they see, not that they don't see HE as accessible, but it's more accessible at the college because they've got lecturers that they know and can trust. And if it's the same piece of paper that they always used to say to me, then why would I go to the university? So I think they are unaware maybe of the difference in experience potentially. So I think it's a lot down to belongingness and the staff, because the college I'm talking about had a great team of staff in the sport department. They were just fantastic. So I would be, I guess.
I suppose in your previous role, you didn't want them to leave, you wanted them to stay.
Yeah, and now I'm going back to them, and they're not happy with me at the moment. To be honest, I'm trying to steal all their students.
Yeah, sure.
In regard to transition, you mentioned about some solutions and suggestions. How did you come onto those solutions?
Again, based on my own anecdotal experience, what we've done this year and what we did at the college previously, and then married that with the literature, really. I really don't think there's one hard or fast, simple rule that's going to fit every single student. There just isn't. So transition, unfortunately, is going to remain unsolved forever. But there are things we can do to really help. We're always going to lose 1 or 2 students, but we can keep it to 1 or 2 if we just know a little bit more about each individual student. I think that's the main thing for me.
What's the attrition rate like before you started all this?
Okay, so I've got some retention figures from sport and exercise from the department that tended to lose around 20% of students, I believe, or 15% of students, which I thought was a hell of a lot. I'd come from a college where we got 100% retention and achievement every single year, mainly because there was such a pressure on it, but there was very rigid registers and attendance. That's something that I've tried to implement this year. Just keeping a track of students, nudging them if I feel like they're going off track, whatever it might be. So that has changed a lot. I've got 100% retention for my courses this year, which I'm very proud of. There's obviously something that myself and a couple of other colleagues are doing who've got that high retention rate that is offsetting that attrition. And I think it's based on some of these things that we've done. I've just got to evidence it, which is really tricky.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, no problem. Yeah. Taking up too much time now.
Are you still recording?
Yes, let me.
Might check on that.
It's 2 years, but I think.
Right, okay.